Not doing the inner work, not having self-awareness, not reflecting on yourself, a complete killer. How there is absolutely life after infidelity if the partner who committed it is willing to take responsibility. Because when you really trust yourself, you wouldn't be in situations that might be a suspicion. Honestly, I think most of us self-sabotage in little ways that we're not even aware of. There are normally two reasons why the relationship's dwindling. One, kids, and also as one partner becomes maybe more successful than the other.
Hi guys, welcome back to Inspired by Success. I'm your host, Linda Vo, and I'm thrilled to welcome back relationship expert and coach Katarina Polonska. In part one, we explored how mastering the science of love can be a powerful tool for career success. Katarina shared eye-opening insights on attachment styles and how ambition driven by unresolved wounds can lead to unhealthy patterns. Today, we're diving into the hidden relationship killers that silently sabotage even the most driven individuals. From social media distractions to toxic habits masquerading as healthy communication, Katarina is here to break down what's holding people back from real connections. Plus, she'll share practical advice to strengthen your relationships while chasing your goals. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a leader, or simply striving for balance, this episode will challenge your perspective and inspire growth. Let's get into it and welcome back Katarina Polonska.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me back.
I know, it's such an awesome episode before. I really enjoyed it. And I said we had to have part two. And this time, I really wanted to know, because you've had the experience with so many of your clients. The one thing I wanted to ask you first of all is, what are the top 5 relationship killers that you see?
It's all such a good question. All right. Top 5. Number 1, not doing the inner work. And I can imagine you probably knew that was coming, right? But not doing the inner work, not having self-awareness, not reflecting on yourself is a complete killer. I literally just got off a call with an older gentleman who was telling me how he's unhappy. He's been unhappily married for 10 years. He doesn't have sex with his wife. He's just miserable. And there's no accountability. There's zero self-awareness, zero self-reflection. And for me, that radar goes off of I don't even want to work with you. I can't. I just don't want to. Because if you're not going to take ownership of your side of the street and be willing to be humble and be vulnerable and to go inward and clean up your stuff before you even come to your partner, it's just going to be a hot mess. And you're going to be dumping, you're going to be projecting, you're going to be blaming. It's not going to be fun. And frankly, I'm not that interested in being involved in drama like that. So doing the inner work is so important, right? And it can be as simple as recognizing that it takes 2 to tango. And if you're not happy in your relationship, then you're going to have a role in it. Doesn't mean that you're going to be to blame. A lot of the stuff that you can be doing can be really innocent and coming from a good place. It could be coming from something unconscious. It could be that you're self-sabotaging without even realizing. It could be that you just don't have the skills, but you still want to take ownership, right? So that's probably the first killer. Second one is, if you haven't taken that ownership, you're very unlikely to know what it is that you actually need in a relationship. And so a lot of us have a lot of what we want, right? We all know what we want. Not everyone, but a lot of women want the 6'3" guy in finance. They want the person who's beautiful and has, the money or whatever it might be. We all know what we want. And we all want, physical touch and words of affirmation and compliments and all the nice things. But it's what is it that you actually need beneath that? And let's be really vulnerable about what that need is. And let's get really granular on how to meet that need, because everyone's going to be really different. And so if you're walking around feeling a little bit unfulfilled in your relationship, and you don't actually know why you're unfulfilled, you don't actually know what it is specifically that you would need to make yourself more fulfilled, because you haven't explored it, then again, it's kind of pointless, right? You're going to be asking for something from your partner that actually isn't the right thing in the first place at all. And you're just kind of going down this rabbit hole of looking for, I don't know, I'll think of an example. Okay, so I have a client who, she has been wanting from her relationship, she wants her husband to have deeper conversations. I hear that a lot from women, that they just want deeper conversations with their partners. And I'm like, what an interesting thing to want, right? Because actually, when you break it down, deeper conversations are potentially conflicts. They're potentially quite hard. They're potentially quite scary. it's not actually the depth of the conversation that you're looking for. What you need, the need beneath it, is to be seen, to feel heard, to feel understood, to feel safe, to feel validated. These are the needs beneath the deeper conversation, potentially, right? And so solving for that is going to be way more effective than trying to chase deeper conversations for the sake of deeper conversations, because that's just kind of like a red herring. Make sense?
Yeah. A lot of the things that I didn't learn from you, it's good that you're revealing, because the things that we don't know about ourselves, and you got into the core part of it and keep going.
Absolutely. And like most of us don't know this, right? Like I remember before I started doing this work in depth, I thought that I was just a woman who liked flowers, who liked the guy to pay for the date, and all these like really superficial things. And, I wanted like the masculine man and all of this like rubbish, where actually what I really wanted was to feel safe, right? I wanted to feel safe. That was like my big fundamental core need that was super unmet throughout my childhood for so many reasons. And so for me, safety was such a big need, and to feel wanted, to feel desired. And so these were all proxies, the paying for dinners, the whatever it might be, these are all proxies. They weren't actually fulfilling that need necessarily. And so getting to the need is so much more effective and solving for it at that level than hanging around on the superficial stuff and chasing the red herrings. So that's the second killer. Third killer, not speaking up. So imagine if you've cleared out your own side of the street and you're feeling pretty good, you've taken accountability, you know that you're not perfect, you've got more granular on what your needs are. If you don't actually communicate that to your partner and don't actually say anything, again, it's a moot point, right? And so many of us think that we're good at communication. Again, I was the queen of this. I thought I was a great communicator. I was the queen of writing long messages to my partner and like dumping stuff onto him and like coming in all guns blazing with like my feelings and saying what I wanted and what I craved and just like dumping all this stuff onto him. I was super anxious. And in the end, and then I'd tell my friends as well. Obviously, I would screenshot the message, right? And I'd send it to them and be like, what do you think? What do you think? Like this, oh my God, I would do that so much. And in the end, when I actually looked back on that relationship, it's like, yeah, I was communicating, but was I actually communicating as clearly and vulnerably as I could have? No, I wasn't. Because in all of that chaos, in all of that expression, all of that like throwing myself out there, I wasn't actually being really vulnerable with the most distilled essence of what it was that I was experiencing, which was feeling unsafe, feeling deeply scared, fearing abandonment, fearing that I was going to be left alone. Like these are the really vulnerable things that I should have been communicating. But instead I was complaining about X, Y, and Z and asking for this and being upset that he came home late, whatever it was. I wasn't communicating the right stuff, right? And again, I think we all do this. We all do this. It's an art to learn to distill to the essence of what you're trying to say based on what you need after you've done your own clearing. And it's so powerful. When you actually do this, you save yourself so much grief and so much drama. It's actually interesting. Like, I don't really ask anyone for advice anymore in my relationship, which is kind of curious. I was reflecting on that, how I've lost a lot of friends. The more secure I've become, the more friends I've lost, which kind of makes sense because actually a lot of the friendships that I think I had were kind of trauma bonded friendships. They were really codependent. It was like I had to be in crisis in order for my friend to feel needed, in order for me to have something to dump on my friend, right? Not healthy. Wow. I think that's kind of the third killer. The fourth killer is, and this is kind of maybe a little bit of a more traditional one, but some say not trying, but not leaning in to do the work. I don't mean the inner work here. I mean more when you've been together for a long time. And again, I see this with couples who've been together for anything over 6 years. Of course, the chemistry is not going to be there in the same way. Of course, the attraction will probably have dwindled to an extent. Of course, the intimacy will be very different, right? That doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean that it's bad at all. It just means you've evolved to another stage in your relationship. And to resume, to reconnect, to reignite things, it's going to take a bit of work. And that's okay, right? That's okay. I remember speaking to one of my most happily married friends, And she's actually Russian, and we were having this conversation in this like lovely cafe in Knightsbridge in London. And she was saying how she's very candid. She's like, been with her husband. She's been with her husband, I think, 12 years. And she's like, sometimes I look at him and she's like, what did I do? Marry you? Like, I'm not attracted. But she's like, but then I have to snap myself out of it. And I have to remember that I made a choice and I'm choosing again. I'm choosing him again. Right? And then it's her job. It's my job to get back into what makes me feel feminine, desirable, desiring, what makes me feel more playful and full of that chemistry that we would have at the beginning, right? At the beginning when you're getting ready to go on a date and you're putting lots of time and effort into your appearance and you're dressing up and you're trying on different outfits and all of this stuff, which is so playful and so creative. We stop doing that later in life, later on with our partners, right? And so, yeah, that's going to take a bit of work. Lying around like a vegetable on the couch in your sweatpants, which I'm absolutely guilty of. But that's not the most effective way of keeping the intimacy alive. Let's be honest, right? So there's this kind of like balance, I think, between being comfortable and being safe and being best friends and then leaning into put a bit of effort in. I think one of the best bits of advice I ever got for that actually was, it's so simple. It's like, if you're going out for a date night, get ready separately. Don't get ready in like the same freaking bathroom where you can see them in their like holy boxes and you're in your like, you're like stained underwear. I don't know why you have stained underwear, but like, I'm not saying that you have that, but try and keep some mystery.
Yeah.
Put on a bathrobe, go do your hair and makeup in a separate place, have a glass of wine or whatever you want, and then meet later, right? I thought that was such like a lovely, put some music on and get back into that date night spirit, even if you have kids. Like, the stuff is doable. So that's the fourth. And then the fifth one is honesty. If you're not being honest with your partner, with yourself, you're kind of doomed. It's just not to end on a dark note. I mean, these are the killers of relationship, right? If you're not being honest, if you're not being honest with yourself, and that doesn't mean that you have to do anything drastic, right? Again, I had this guy come today and he's saying, he doesn't have any sex with his wife. He's got this high physical need for it. Great. He's being honest. Probably should have been honest about that a long time ago. He's now contemplating leaving his wife and he's, coming to me and I can feel the frustration, but it's like, dude, be honest with her. Give her the grace to understand and be honest with yourself of your role and how you contributed to this problem, because you actually kept your mouth shut for the past 8 years. You were chatting to women on LinkedIn, which is what he was doing, and getting that need met in an alternative way, right? So be honest about that. Take ownership, take accountability that you have directly contributed to this problem. That doesn't mean that anyone's blaming you. It just means that that probably wasn't the most effective thing to do. And now we need to course correct. And equally, be honest with her before you make any drastic decisions of exiting your marriage. I mean, that's a big leap, right? So being honest with yourself and with your partner is so important. But again, I caveat that this isn't about radical honesty, which I think is such a buzzword or buzz phrase that's been thrown around about be radically honest. And it's like, be radically honest after you've done the inner work on yourself, cleaned up your side of the street and owned your triggers, regulated yourself, processed what it is that you actually want to say, that you need to say, and then say that in an honest and kind way. Don't be honest in the sense of, I'm just going to tell them my truth and then dump a ton of stuff like I used to, which is actually pretty abusive, right? Especially if you're dating someone who's a little bit avoidant and you come at them with this like barrage of texts. It's not nice. It's not nice, right? It's not taking into consideration how they might receive it, how they might be feeling. You're dumping your stuff. It's very unprocessed. It's very unregulated. It's just not good. So be honest after you've done that processing. I really like imago therapy, because imago therapy or imago dialogue, they force you to communicate in such a succinct way, in such a simple, articulate way, right? Rather than saying like, oh, I felt devastated and sad because he did blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, just saying like, I feel heartbroken when I experience, like, it's so clear without overwhelming the other person. So you can be honest in a kind way. Not a long answer.
Kind of like saying, like, just simplifying it. I feel alone and or neglected or abandoned when you do this, and reject me. Yeah.
Or even like when I experience, right? Because I always try to move away from the you statements. It's so cliche, but saying, if I said to you like, oh, when you did X, Y, and Z, I felt blah, 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 there's an accusation there. it's very subtle, but when we're trying to not get into drama and not get into serious conflict, it's significant. So saying something as simple as like, when I experienced feeling alone because I experienced you being late, right? That's different. It's kind of softening it a little bit, as opposed to when you were late and you left me alone. There's like a different tone behind it. And one is more of a, I'm owning my experience here. Maybe you weren't late. Like in your mind, you thought it was like 2:30 and I thought it was 2, right? So my experience is that, yeah, you were late. Your experience is that you were on time. There's two subjective realities here. So the more that you can own it and just make it about you and your experience and share it, the smoother that dialogue's going to be.
Okay, interesting. Now, you mentioned trauma bond as well. I watched a YouTube video not long ago about the movie, The Wall Street with Leonardo, and the actual real life wife. I watched a video, and she was like a therapist now because all that trauma she experienced when she went through the relationship. I'm going to have to watch it again. She mentions the trauma bond as well. And then I thought, oh, okay, that sounds familiar. So what are your thoughts on that? And have you had experience with two people who have had trauma bonds? They've had overcome a chaotic upbringing, for example, and then two people come together and there's a trauma bond. Have you seen people successfully recover from trauma bonds, or is it not a good thing when there's two trauma bonds attached together?
Yeah, no, great question. And you absolutely can recover from it, right? But the relationship's going to have to be different, and there's going to have to be a different contract, because when we have the trauma bond, it's simply put, I mean, the best way I like to think about it is, if person A has a lot of wounding around, let's say, abandonment, I'll keep it simple, has that around abandonment, right? They have a lot of wounding around abandonment. They have a deep fear of being alone. They have a deep kind of anxiousness, and I'm talking about anxious attachment here, right? And they believe that they're somehow not good enough. They believe that they are somehow bad, that they're defective, all these kind of classical core wounds. And these are the beliefs internally. Then because that's what they believe, because that's their worldview on a deep subconscious level, they're going to be unconsciously attracted to someone who makes that true for them, because that's what they believe, right? It's not that you're seeking out to be traumatized or you're seeking out to be abused in an unhappy relationship. You're seeking out what most closely reflects what you believe internally in your own unique worldview. And your unique worldview is going to be based on your childhood. So I'll use myself as an example. If I grew up with a father who was pretty absent, and he just was absent, he was working really hard, he was a great dad, but he was working, he was trying to make money for the family, so he was away from home all the time. If I grew up with that, and my belief internally on a subconscious level is that I'm alone, I've been abandoned, or I will be abandoned, I can't trust men because they come and go. Like, he would go away for 5 days and come home for a day, then he'd go away again. Like, they couldn't trust him because he was always coming and going. And I interpreted as a little kid that the reason he was coming and go was because I wasn't good enough, because I was bad, right? That was like my little childlike interpretation. Children have this egocentrism where they make it about themselves. So there I am thinking all of this stuff is very familiar to me. It's just how I see the world. I then grow up, and as an adult, let's say I don't challenge it, and I'm walking around as a woman in her 20s or in her 30s with this internal deep belief system, right? And it's just so ingrained in my psyche that this is how I see the world. Then I'm not going to be attracted, or I'm not going to find a man attractive who's going to challenge that worldview, because he's going to be really unfamiliar. It's going to be really kind of strange to me. I'm going to look at him and be like, I don't get this guy. I don't get his energy. I don't know what he's about. So I could actually be looking at a man who's going to treat me like a queen and be really kind to me, and find him odd, find him unfamiliar. I see this a lot, right, with clients. The guy who's going to be most attractive to me is going to be the guy who's going to, lo and behold, make me feel abandoned, like I'm not good enough, like I'm going to be alone, like I can't trust him. Because on a subconscious level, that is what's familiar to me. That is what reminds me of my childhood, reminds me of my original blueprint of what a man is. And so I'm going to find him very attractive. I'm probably going to have a lot of chemistry. The sex will probably be amazing, right? And I'll be very addicted to him, because on a subconscious level, it's like I'm coming home. It's like I'm coming back to the original man in my life, which was my father. So he's very, very compelling, right? He, on the flip side, is probably going to have a very similar thing happening between me and one of his primary caregivers. He's probably going to be feeling really smothered, oppressed by maybe his mother or his father. He might be feeling being trapped throughout his childhood. And so again, as an adult, much like myself, he's going to be seeking that out because it's going to be unconsciously familiar. So then we have these two people who find each other's childhoods in each other. And this happens in like 99% of relationships anyway, right? They find each other very attractive, very compelling. The chemistry's through the roof and, fireworks and blah, blah, blah. They get together. Everything's lovely. Everything's like, I feel like I've come home to this person. Everything's romantic and wonderful. I can't sleep at night. I'm so happy with them. They're the one. And then after the honeymoon period wears off and the hormones kind of die down, then you're like, great. Now this guy's like abandoning me, or he's like walking away, or like I can't trust him, or he cheated on me. And all the different wounds that you have come up. And so all of that to say, like, that is the trauma bond, right? So when people tell me that the chemistry is amazing, or like sex is amazing, I'm always looking at it with a little bit of a raised eyebrow of like, okay, did that come later in your relationship? Did that come after years of working on it and conscious communication and healing? Or did it come from the get-go? Because if it came from the get-go and you're literally salivating at the mouth and you can't sleep at night because you're so addicted to this person, it's telling me that there's a bit of a chemical reaction going on here, which is probably going to be rooted in a trauma bond. So you kind of want to run from that. So anyhow, the question was like, can you recover from that? You absolutely can. The difference is that you're going to lose the trauma bond and you're going to have to create a new bond, right? Now that bond can become a healing bond. I don't see it all that often, if I'm honest, but it can happen. And I'm actually seeing this happen with a client right now, which is magical, like absolutely magical. She came to me wanting to leave her husband, really unfulfilled after, I think it's like 15 years of being together. And she's more on the anxious front. He's more on the dismissive front. They had a trauma bond. They got married. They had kids. And then the mask came off and then the power struggle phase. And she's just been preparing to leave him. But as she's been working on healing her own wounds, and she's been looking at him in a new light and communicating to him so much more clearly what it is that she needs, what it is that she's feeling, and kind of building this new relationship built on honesty and transparency. She's been communicating her fear of being betrayed, and she's been communicating her history with her father and being really open with him. And he has, in turn, actually started communicating back to her how he's been working on himself. And what's really magical is that she wrote to me this morning. She's like, we're having conversations that I never would have imagined we'd had. And I'm seeing a whole new side to him that I didn't even know was there. And it's a whole new person that's uncovering in front of her. And so as the trauma bond's kind of wearing off, they're entering this new evolution, which is really quite incredible. And this is actually, if it lasts and if it works out, it's the bliss stage. It's the stage of a relationship where you work through the power struggle, you work through the complex, you've healed a lot of your core wounds, and you're now in kind of like the honeymoon, but better. You're in this much more holistic, grounded, genuine, deep love space, which is so much more sustainable than the chemicals of the honeymoon.
But both people you mentioned that he was working too. So that means you're saying that if there's a trauma bond, both people have to do the inner work, or can just one person do the inner work and then change things up with the relationship?
Ultimately, both have to. However, I will caveat that her husband's not been doing therapy. He's not been doing coaching. He's been doing his own processing, whatever that might look like, right? And a big question for her has been, I kind of need him to do more, but she's been doing a lot. She's been doing coaching with me. She was questioning at the same time what he has shared with her about how he's been doing inner child meditations. She was like, what? Even know that language? Like, wow. Where did you learn this, right? And he's like, well, I Googled it and I've been researching a little bit. And the point is, he has been doing the inner work, but in his own way. And actually, this is something my husband and I talked about on my podcast. My husband doesn't do coaching. He doesn't do relationship coaching the way I do, right? I've done literally probably 14 years more of therapy than he has. We're very different. But it doesn't mean that the work is any less valid. It just means that one person might be processing another way. And, truth of the matter, there probably will be a person who's leading on it, who's coming back to the relationship with a few more tools and exercises, and maybe, they're bringing them to the table. But as long as the other person's open and willing to lean in, which absolutely can take a bit of time to build that trust, that actually you're not here to criticize them or nitpick at them or whatever. You're here because you love them and you want to stay with them and you want to have the most wonderful relationship you can. And so you learn these different tools and techniques and you want to practice them together. It can be a case that the partner's doing less, but they're still doing it, if that makes sense. They're open to it at least.
I like that. Speaking of infidelity, you mentioned it before as well. A lot of people assume infidelity breaks relationship, and especially with today's day and age with technology, social media, constant digital distractions. What are your thoughts on the infidelity piece and forgiveness? That's another piece of it as well. Do relationships, can they survive actually after some infidelity that happens in a relationship? What are your thoughts and what have you seen in your experiences?
Yeah. And that's such a great question. And yes, they can survive. And I say that as a woman who, I've been cheated on. It didn't survive. I ended up walking away. And my mother was cheated on. Didn't survive. My father left. So in my own kind of personal experience, both relationships have ended. That was the right thing to happen, though, irrespective of the relationship, right? And the infidelity is almost like I was going to say the icing on the cake, but it's kind of like the final straw where in the run-up to the infidelity, there are so many different steps that have to happen. And all of these steps aren't necessarily irreparable. So, and what I'm talking about here is what I see a lot with clients, which is when people commit infidelity, it's very rarely. I have yet to meet anyone, and I have a lot of clients who have either been cheated on or who are cheated. I have yet to meet anyone who commits infidelity from a place of, screw my partner, I just want to do this. I've never seen that. The infidelity is normally the last straw after potentially months, years of being quite unhappy and feeling quite unfulfilled and feeling quite lost and feeling, maybe you're suppressing your needs. Maybe you're having to shapeshift and be someone different in the relationship. Maybe you're having to bite your tongue and walk around on eggshells. Maybe you're having to just, completely change who you are. And you don't feel authentic. You don't feel relaxed. You don't feel like you can be yourself. Maybe you're not getting the validation and the love that you need. Or maybe things are just, I've seen this happen. Maybe you're just in the relationship when actually you don't really want to be in the relationship because actually you are craving more freedom. And maybe that's conflicted for you because you want the freedom, you want the experience, but you also want that love and intimacy. And so you're just starved of love and intimacy, right? What I'm describing here is a series of needs that aren't getting met. And again, very often people don't know what their needs are. People don't know what their needs are. You ask most people who have cheated, they probably won't be able to tell you what need was getting met in that moment, right? Because the vocabulary is not there, the self-awareness isn't there. However, that act is the tipping point where, okay, clearly there's a problem here. Clearly there's a problem. Now something immoral has happened. Something has broken the code of monogamy that you have committed to, that you have the contract that you've made with your partner. That is a huge red flag that there is something deeply, deeply, deeply wrong. And likely this isn't something that's been wrong just, from the get-go. It's been happening for a while. So it's an indicator. And if we can get over the moment, the red flag, the incident, and start looking at what transpired in the build-up to that moment, what needs weren't getting met, what conversations weren't being had, what vulnerability wasn't being shared, what honesty wasn't being revealed, then we can actually recover from it, right? Because the infidelity is just a symptom of a bigger problem, and that bigger problem is the needs that are not getting met and the communication that's not being had around them, right? So all of that to say that absolutely, if you can get over that, the moment, if it was just a moment or the affair, and actually look at the needs, then things can be a lot better. I have a couple who the husband cheated on her and it was brutal for 2 years. Like, it was brutal for 2 years. She was heartbroken. She threw him out, blah, 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 all the horrible things. But he came back, tail between his legs, really wanting to work on this. And together, when they began to unpack what is it that was actually lacking for him, it's so interesting because actually it was like sex. It was like sexual intimacy. She hadn't been providing, I guess, what he needed. And what they actually concluded on doing, which is so interesting, and this is, I think, quite a rare case, but in order to get that need met, they decided to open up their marriage just for a short period of time, for like 6 months, I think. They opened up their marriage and they allowed both parties to have sex with other people to get that need met for him, right? And she was like, fair enough. Like, I think for her as well, it was a bit of a, well, if he's cheated, then I'm going to get out there as well. It was tricky. However, it actually really worked because he got that need met very quickly. And, I was kind of joking about this with my husband, how she was getting a lot more activity than he was. And, he got that need met. She was feeling pretty freaking great at this point. And it was like, okay, the needs are met now. We've had this vulnerability. We're now recommitting to each other. And so they closed their relationship, recommitted, and now it's been years and years and years. They're super happy together. That's one pretty extreme example. Not saying that has. It's pretty extreme. But the point is that I love how Esther Perel talks a lot about this, right? How there is absolutely life after infidelity if the partner who committed it is willing to take responsibility for whatever needs weren't getting met and to communicate about them, to do that inner work, to work on any self-sabotaging patterns that may have led them to it, to work on their communication, to work on their honesty, to have remorse, right? And if the other party is willing to forgive, right? To forgive, to put it in the past, and to commit to helping partner one, the one who cheated, to get their needs met. It really is that, right? There has to be that forgiveness. There has to be that collaboration of, it takes two to tango. And I say this, I've been cheated on. It does take two to tango. I look back in retrospect and I'm like, yeah, it sucked. I hated being cheated on. I was blindsided at the time. I'm not blindsided in retrospect. I can see he shouldn't have been in a relationship with me. It was too early for him, right? Like, it was too early. It was too much. He was like suffocating under it. He wanted to get out. And I didn't let him because I didn't want him to go. So I can kind of see my role in that, right? If I'd taken the pressure off a little bit and maybe stopped sending those 20-page messages and actually given him some breathing room, right? Then like maybe he wouldn't have cheated, or maybe he just wouldn't be in a relationship with me, which probably would have been bad for both people ultimately, right? Because it was very forced. I mean, I take that accountability, absolutely. Still sucked. I still ended it because I couldn't see how, with where he was at, with where he wanted to be kind of developmentally, he wasn't ready for what I wanted. I wanted, marriage. I wanted really intense commitment. He wasn't ready for that. So, and I wasn't prepared to wait 5-10 years. So of course it ended. But if he had been willing in a different way, then potentially it would have worked. I mean, who knows? There absolutely is life after it though.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. And also, like you mentioned the red flags as well early on. How can someone tell if their partner is genuinely interested in them, or just their success or their status at the start? That could be another red flag as well. So,
So you mean like, how can someone tell if their partner that they're in a relationship with is with them for the right reasons?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Because, you mentioned red flags. I'm just thinking of other red flags as well. Could lead to all sorts of trouble in the long run.
Well, I think if at any point you're considering that maybe your partner's with you for the wrong reasons, whether it's your status, your money, your education, whatever it might be, that to me boils down to a self-trust question, right? Because when you really trust yourself and you have a very strong connection to your gut, to your inner wisdom, to your inner knowing, you wouldn't be in situations, or you wouldn't stay in situations where that might be a suspicion, right? So to me, it's a self-trust question, and we build self-trust by acting upon it. I remember learning this after I'd been cheated on. Oh, and it was such a big wake-up call for me, because I always thought, well, my father cheated my mother and I got to so I must have trust issues and blah, 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 blah. The only reason I had trust issues wasn't because of what had happened to me in my past. It's because I wasn't following through with what my gut knew. So if you know something on a deep internal level, or you sense something, or you're picking up, your kind of spidey sense is picking up, and it's not fear because you've cleared the fear and you worked on your wounding and you're pretty confident that you have a bit of a spidey sense. If you don't follow through with that and act upon it, you're basically communicating to your subconscious, I'm not listening to you. You don't matter. Shut up, right? And that wounding then of being unseen, of being unheard, of not mattering, of not being good enough, and ultimately of not trusting, is going to get even worse. And it means that you don't trust yourself. So an example would be like, if you feel something's off with your partner, do something about it. Process it for yourself, obviously, but talk to them. Get that clarity. Act. Don't just bury it. Because if you bury it, you're going to be riddled with trust issues. And then you're going to be suspicious, right?
Sometimes people don't want to be vulnerable though. And, like it's scary for many to reveal their vulnerability. And I can definitely relate to that.
Sure.
So, how can someone open up without feeling too exposed in their relationship and overcome these barriers to vulnerability? Especially that's why you often see when there's no communication, sometimes because that person doesn't want to be vulnerable and express that because they've got barriers there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can feel that kind of the vulnerability. It's almost like a hangover, right? When you've shared something too much or it feels like too much and you want to retreat into your shell. There's nothing saying that you have to share everything, right? I do believe that we will get to have our own private realms in our minds, which are just ours, whether that's with your shadow, with your, sexuality, whether it's your mental health, whatever. Like everyone deserves to have their own freedom and their own privacy from their partner. That's your sovereignty as a human being. You don't have to share that. The vulnerability is important if it's affecting them, right? So if it's affecting how you show up with them, then they do deserve to know about it. They do deserve to be privy to it. And so what that might look like is for you to take some time to really, again, process it, be with it, feel it, maybe journal on it, get really clear on like, what is it that I'm wanting to share here? And what will it give me to share this? For what purpose am I sharing it, right? Getting really clear on that yourself. And then it's scary, but it boils down to just bracing yourself a little bit and, softening into that vulnerability, softening into that, and bracing yourself to the extent that you're not going into a place of collapse, right? It's kind of this, like, one of my favorite teachers, he'd say it's like a yogic pose. It's where you're soft and you're able to share and you're able to reveal your truth, but you're staying upright and you're not collapsing into trauma, into chaos, into everything that becomes too much for them. It's scary. It's scary. Oh, it's scary. Like, I think it was about a month ago, I had big stuff come up, some big old wounds flared up that I was like, I thought these were gone. I don't know where these came from with my husband. And oh, it was horrible. For half a day, I was like, oh, this is like old stuff. I knew it was nothing to do with him. It was just like old wounding. It was like visceral. It was in my body. I was processing. I was like working through it, and I was like physically shaking. And then at one point I was like, well, obviously I just need to share this with him, because sharing it with a compassionate witness is always going to be helpful, having someone see it. And I remember going to him, and it felt so scary to share it, even though, we have a great relationship. But it was like, I was shaking and I was crying, and I was just like holding the icon and like terrified of what I was going to share. But I shared it, and I asked, so before sharing something, well, you want to ask for consent. Or it's now a good time to share something really vulnerable. And you want to maybe caveat it that what I'm going to share with you is something really difficult and really vulnerable for me and something really scary. So I'm asking for a bit of grace as I share this with you, and like just kindness or compassion, whatever you can offer me, because I'm really scared to share this with you. And then you share it, assuming that you feel safe to, right? But just even kind of preempting that a little bit, you give them the moment to kind of land and be like, whew, okay, something big's coming my way. Let me just get ready. I'm here to listen to it. She's looking for kindness. She's looking for compassion. That's it, right? So kind of preempting them a little bit. Equally, if you're going to share something that's maybe scary, maybe you want to start with like, hey, I'm going to share something with you that's really scary for me. What I'm going to share might seem painful. I'm really not trying to criticize you. I'm saying this from a place of deep love. I'm saying this from a place of trying to improve our relationship, because I deeply care for you and I love you. And I'm so scared that if I don't get this need or this doesn't happen, that I'm going to lose you. This isn't a criticism. I'm really hopeful that you can hear this openly. And I'm I'm kind of scared to share it with you, right? So like, again, like preempting stuff and hedging stuff is pretty helpful. Kind of giving your partner a heads up of what's coming.
Did something trigger you at that time with something he said, or because like triggers is something I've only been self-aware of as well, like something they say or do, and then you just overreact and you feel way too many thoughts and emotion. Was it something that triggered you with the conversation?
Yeah, no, it was something we're doing. So as a business owner, and now that we've moved to Canada, my lawyer was like, you need a postnup. And I was like, okay. So it was getting a postnup. We've been putting in the paperwork to get that done, literally purely business protection if God forbid anything was to happen. And it's funny because I went to being this second like, rah, 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 I'm a business owner, I can do this. I found it such a triggering experience of sitting with this reality of like, here I am preparing this document where the subtext is like, yeah, we might break up. Couples, sometimes break up.
And you didn't want it. Yeah.
The subtext of the postnup is like betrayal, right?
Oh,
That's why it's there. You're there so that you don't like screw each other over, which is what happened with my parents. I've seen it happen, right? I've seen a lot of really ugly divorces. So that for me was so triggering and like, oh, I cannot imagine going through this. I never want to go through this. And yet here we are, doing all the paperwork to take care of it for ourselves. But yeah, ultimately it triggered this deep, deep, deep fear of betrayal, right? Which would make sense because ultimately my father was so absent throughout most of my life. And then he did cheat on my mother. That betrayal wound, it's going to flare up from time to time. It's like that onion, right? You keep peeling away the onion, you get to another thing and it's like back. But again, I breathed through it and yeah, within like half a day it was gone.
Okay.
Thank goodness.
That's powerful. Thanks for sharing that. In terms of self-sabotage, you mentioned the patterns, and something that we talked about before when we chatted that I wasn't even aware of. You asked me a certain question and I didn't really know that it was related to self-sabotaging patterns. What are some of the self-sabotaging patterns you see people do in a relationships? And is it on a subconscious level as well?
Yeah, I think that all self-sabotage to me is subconscious, right? My worldview is that human beings generally, unless you're a sociopath, generally are trying to do the best that they can with the time and the resources and the knowledge that they have. We're all trying to do our best, right? So if I have a deadline and I'm failing to meet that deadline and I'm procrastinating, I'm not trying to be bad. I'm not trying to like screw up my work. If I'm with a partner and I find myself being, self-sabotaging in the sense that maybe I'm like really chasing them and really putting a lot of pressure on them and really trying to get like answers from them and I'm coming on really strong, which is my pattern. I'm not doing that because I'm trying to hurt them or I'm a bad person or I'm like ignorant or stupid. I'm doing that because there's a deep need inside of me that isn't getting met and it's doing what it can to get itself met. And it's depending on old childlike strategies, right? So for me in that instance, when I used to come on like really strong and like be really needy and like really quite demanding with my partner, it's the same thing that I would have done as a child, right? Which is I would have been clutching my mum's like dress or whatever, pulling at it, like yelling, trying to get her attention. Until eventually she would pick me up and give me some attention, whatever it was I was looking for. Or I would go around and I would like pull my brother's leg and pull my dad's leg and my mom and I'd try and get everyone's attention. It's a childlike strategy. It's not coming from like a malicious place, right? So we self-sabotage in relationships all the freaking time. And again, it's not because you're trying to ruin it or you're trying to damage it. It's you're just trying to get your needs met. You're trying to get your needs met and you don't have the best strategies. And you don't even know what you're trying to solve for half the time. I think if people who procrastinated knew what need is trying to get met through the procrastination, they just wouldn't procrastinate anymore, right? So I see lots of self-sabotage. Self-sabotage can be as simple as like, goodness, I see it a lot in my work with people who tell me that they want to get help with their relationship. And then as soon as it's kind of crunch time and we're getting near to that conversation, they disappear and they run away. So I'm like, well, that's self-sabotage because then you're just avoiding the issue. You're avoiding it. The need that's getting met there is probably a need for feeling safe, right? They're probably not feeling very safe by leaning in to do this work. So that need for safety grips them and it's like, oh, let me get away from this. Similarly, if there's a self-sabotaging pattern of being really critical of your partner, that's a really big one where we start like nitpick and we, find problems with them and like nothing that they do is good enough. That's another protective mechanism. it's again your need for safety over kind of kicking in there, and you feel safe because you're pushing them away. There might also be a bit of a power dynamic, right? Where if you push them down because you're criticizing them and you get to kind of come up because you're the criticizer, you can feel safer, and there's a intimacy gap there, right? Could be a control thing as well. You're feeling a bit deprived of control, so you get control by putting your partner down. Again, none of it's conscious necessarily. Doesn't make it healthy though. Honestly, I think most of us self-sabotage in little ways that we're not even aware of. Some of the ways are much bigger than others. Cheating on your partner is obviously a really big form of self-sabotage because you're trying to get a need met, and it's a subconscious way of getting it met, and it's not the most productive way. Some of the ways are more slight, right? So we can overcome them. We just need to build awareness of what those needs are and actually solve for them.
Wow, things that I didn't even think about there. That was very interesting as well. I want to talk about success in relationship and intimacy struggles as well. Can career or financial success like unintentionally create emotional distance in a relationship?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I think most of the people who come to work with me, I ask them, there are normally two reasons why the relationship's dwindling. One, kids, notoriously. So it's like after kids, things tanked. And also, as one partner becomes maybe more successful than the other, and maybe they make more money, maybe they climb the corporate ladder, maybe they build a business and it gets really successful, there can be this kind of imbalance between workloads. There can be an imbalance in terms of power and financial leverage. And that can create this disconnect, right? Of suddenly, well, when I knew you, you were down here and we understood each other. Now you're up here. I don't know who you are anymore. And you've changed. And maybe your expectations are higher. Maybe the kind of lifestyle that you want is different. It could also just be as simple as we have less time for each other because we're two ships in the night. And actually, we're just disconnecting. And the only time that we have together is like 30 minutes before we go to bed, which is not the most productive time to actually have a deep conversation or really check in with each other. So, I mean, that's a really, really common one, right? Just the time. And that to me typically comes down to a prioritization issue, because we prioritize so many things in our life that aren't our partner, right? We prioritize like obviously the kids, we prioritize our work, we prioritize like health, going to the gym, getting groceries. If you actually boil it down, at the end of it, how much time do you really have with your partner? It's not very much, right? So prioritizing that and finding the time and space for them is going to be incredibly important. It's doable. I don't believe any couple is doomed and doesn't have the time and space for it.
Especially what if they're both ambitious, and that makes it really harder because they're both driven. They really have to make enough time for each other to spend time together.
Yeah.
And I think supporting each other as well, making sure, there's not a competitiveness. It's more of a sporting thing.
Yes.
Do you think like the masculine, feminine role comes into play there too? Because, I've heard stories about when a man and a woman to get together and the female gets too ambitious and then the male doesn't make enough money and then they feel emasculated. They don't feel like they should be providing the traditional sense. What are your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting that you said she gets like too ambitious, because that made me think like, what is too ambitious, right? Like, what is too ambitious? I think everyone's going to have a different barometer of what ambition is. And there's no manual. I mean, it's a very recent manual that says that men have to be the providers. Like, actually, if you look back at cavemen and blah, 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 like everyone's got different roles, right? So I'm a firm believer that ultimately you don't both want to be in your masculine energy. I think, unfortunately, in our kind of capitalist day and age, that's going to happen in the workplace, right? For the most part, you're both going to be more in your masculine energy, especially if you're both entrepreneurs. The question is like, how are you when you come home to each other? Can you transition? Can you switch off? Can you soften? Can you lean into the more vulnerable places? And can you take in turns? Because there's going to be times where even if you're the breadwinner, you're the masculine figure, that you want to can't like slow down, that you want to let your guard down, that you want to feel held and you want to feel vulnerable. So when we think about kind of the masculine and feminine energies, we want to have the fluidity to be able to move through the range of who we are as human beings, right? And so if as a woman, being in your masculine all day and being a powerhouse and being a CEO and getting all this stuff done fulfills you and gives you life and gives you energy and brings in the revenue, fantastic. Do it. just make sure that you can rebalance when you come home and you can go into that more feminine energy if that's what your partner desires. But for your own mental well-being and your own energetic well-being, you're going to want balance either way, right? Equally, if you're a dude and you like being more in your feminine energy all day and you like staying home and caretaking and being more creative, go nuts. That works for you. Just can you lean more into your masculine energy when your wife comes home, right? And create more of that balance. To me, it's always about balance. And I think the balance that you're referring to is when you've got two powerhouse masculine figures who don't know how to actually switch off and alternate when they get home, right? So they both come home and they're both like two CEOs. Yeah, that's not going to be very nice. That's going to be pretty competitive and not very attractive. So that's like the conscious work that we have to put in.
Okay. And I know that communication, like we mentioned before, is super crucial. I'm just curious about conflict resolution. Oftentimes your partner, just say he's coming home from a hard day at work and they get stressed and they bring that energy home, negative energy. I've done that. I've admitted that I've done that as well. Are there any simple exercises to help couples understand each other better and communicate better during these disagreements and during stressful moments as well? Like, what common communication mistakes do people make as well when you see the stress and conflict?
That's such a huge question. I know that we probably don't have time to go into all of it. High level, there's your example of, coming home and there's a lot of stress. To me, like the best hack that you can have with communication and conflict is bringing curiosity and compassion. Like 2 C's. If you can remember that, just curiosity and compassion, you will go far in life. Because let's say your partner does come home and they're really grumpy. I actually wrote a LinkedIn post about this today. They come home, they're really grumpy, they're really defensive. They're just like, I don't want to talk to you. They've had a hard day at home. If you're going to turn around and be like, well, you always come home like this, and, start yelling at them, that's not going to help. If you start to take it really personally, get really upset by it and start to retreat and shut down, also not going to help. If you're greeting them with curiosity and compassion, like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry to hear that. That sounds really, really hard. Do you want to share what happened or do you need some time to decompress? Very different, right? Very different. It's kind of much more empathic, it's much more understanding. There's a curiosity there of like, what's going on? You're bringing some compassion. And then keeping that in mind if you have a conflict, right? So if a partner's like, if you're disagreeing or you're misunderstanding each other, then asking, the curiosity can look as simple as like, let me check that I'm understanding you correctly. What I'm hearing is that you're saying X, Y, and Z. Is that what you mean? Did I get that right? That simple level of curiosity is so validating because you're really checking in like, am I actually hearing you correctly? Is there something else that you meant? Or even asking, I'm so curious, like, what did you mean when you said X, Y, and Z? Or how did that make you feel? The difficulty is that your ego is going to want to be getting in the way and it's going to be like, I don't want to ask them that because I'm feeling really crap here. I'm feeling really hurt and sad. Like, how dare they? And like, I don't want to be the nice person, right? Of course, that's where that kind of compassion comes in. And a nice little hack for that is to bring compassion to yourself. So even in the conflict, if you can, my little thing is always like, put my hand on my heart. If I'm in a conflict, bring the compassion to myself in my head, just simply be like, this is really hard. I love myself. It's okay. Telling myself in my head, right? As much as I can during a conflict. Nervous system regulation, slowing myself down, tending to my inner self. And then from that space, offering compassion to someone else, so much easier. So much easier.
It's the energy that you bring to your partner as well. Yeah, you don't want to bring them the negative energy and communicate in a sense when you're in a negative state as well. Just set yourself time to be able to have some time of it. If things are heated, then separate, then come back when it's just the obvious thing to come back when you're in a both calmer state as well.
Absolutely.
Long-term relationships, like sustainability, some people, you mentioned when they've been in a relationship for a long time, you mentioned you have to work on the relationship. I think I heard in a podcast being playful with your partner after a while too. That helps as well. But what other skills and habits do couples need to keep their relationship as strong as possible in order to have a long-lasting relationship?
Big question. Playfulness is key. Bringing in humor is key. Finding things that you both enjoy that are fun for you both is key, right? So ideating, how do we like to have fun? How do we like to have laughter? Incorporating that, because often our lives can become quite dry and quite dull. Having regular opportunities to have those deep conversations that are vulnerable, that allow you to both share your experiences so that you're kind of constantly checking in with each other at least once a week. simply ask, like, how are you feeling this week? What's been going on for you? How has work been for you this week? Is there anything that I can help you with this week? What could have gone better? Like, these kind of questions are so easy and open-ended, but they invite such a deeper conversation. And then staying honest with each other. Like, really just staying honest, doing that self-reflection to check in with, like, how am I feeling? What is it that I would need right now? And then sharing that. That's so important.
Simple steps like that would go a long way because, just to prioritize time with your partner, at least. Because like you said, when relationships and the kids are involved, I've seen a lot of relationships go downhill from there too, because you're often putting your kids' priorities first, and then there's a lot of stress and overwhelm, and then relationships I've seen just plummet, but then a lot of people don't get out of it, and then they're just miserable. I heard something, I see it in like people and friends as well. The woman feels so angry at their partner afterwards, and they have all these expectations, but then it turns their partner into negative people. The girl doesn't reflect back on what she's doing wrong. And I heard a phrase this morning is about a relationship too. Are you bringing, in a fairy tale sense, are you making your prince a toad farmer? I'm like, wow.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
Or are you doing the opposite? Are you raising your toad into a prince? So
yes.
I think that would be something that you got to think about to make a relationship long term. And having the attitude of service, I think, helps as well.
Yes, 100%, 100%. Yeah,
something that I never thought about.
Boundaries.
Yeah, because like the ones that are relationships that I see that are doing bad is that the woman is end up like so content, so negative, and so angry at their partner and not communicating in a way that's nice, and they've just had so much of it, all that overwhelming stress, and eventually it just makes their partner go at the opposite or just use that negativity as well, which isn't very nice. But if someone's listening that feels like their relationship is struggling, what's one small step they can take today to start turning things around? Just a little first step.
I think just even admitting that things aren't going well and that you're struggling and being open to receiving help, whether that's through the form of just even listening to podcasts and educating yourself and Googling stuff, or getting the help of a professional will really go far. And I think that the more that you normalize getting help to help you process your stuff, the better and faster, like the happier you're going to become, truly. And if money's like an issue, there are so many free resources out there, but just getting that help so you can start doing that inner work is the best thing that you can do. Like literally, go listen to podcasts, go listen to your podcast, listen to my podcast, whatever it might be. Just start educating yourself. There's tons of free help out there.
Awesome. Yes, that's a great advice there too, because it just takes that one step of admitting that something's wrong and working on yourself too, because you're going to learn so many different insights and perspectives. So this has been a really insightful, great conversation. Once again, if you found any value or if there was one key message that really resonated with you, put in the comments and let me know what really, really hit to heart in your relationship there. And if you're listening on the podcast, please hit that follow button. It does help the channel grow. Any key final messages that you want to leave our audience with?
That you all deserve true love. You all deserve to live a full life. It is available to you. You just have to want it enough to roll your sleeves up and lean in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
You're so welcome.